let's start with something positive. I rarely point out individuals, but it's important to point out things that you don't see every day. So we'll start with the positive. I have a friend here, her name's Evelyn. She's sitting over there. Raise your hand, Evelyn. So we can see you. There we go. She's right over there. We celebrated her 100th birthday here 3 years ago. 103 years old. She was the first centenarian I ever met, and definitely the first 103-year-old I ever met. We say to Evelyn, Ad mea esrim, until 120. Could happen. And anomalies. Anomalies are sometimes positive. This year, anomalies weren't so positive. There are literally hundreds of October 7th or post-October 7th stories that I could share with you this morning. And some of them are extremely personal to me. Those are my stories. Most of them are about strangers, strangers bound to us by a 3,300-year covenant. Many of them you've heard already. So I need to find a story that perhaps you hadn't heard and would be meaningful to not only today, but to our charge into 5785. And so here it is. January 22nd, 600 meters from the border of Israel, a group of IDF reservists were operating inside and around a pair of buildings. They were laying explosives to destroy Hamas weapons and infrastructure, and terrorists suddenly emerged undetected from a tunnel, and they had RPGs, and they fired at the building, and it set off the explosives, and it caused those buildings to collapse, and 21 young men that could have been your son's friends or fraternity brothers. 21 young men, they died instantly. And the fallen, they represented a mosaic of Israel, settlers, city dwellers, religious, secular, native-born immigrants, all fighting alongside each other. And they all died alongside each other. And one of them was Elkanan Yehuda Svez. And he was from Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba is the site named in the Torah where our matriarch Sarah died. And it is deep in the West Bank. It is an extension of Hebron. It's the site of the tomb of the patriarchs. Immediately following the death of Sarah, the Torah preserves the actual purchase agreement between Abraham and the Hittites for this plot of land. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, they are all buried there. I've been there. That's another story. Today, the area is an enclave of mostly ultra-Orthodox Jews. There's been a Jewish presence in Hebron for the entirety of Jewish history, but it has been a flashpoint of conflict because of where it is, what's required to protect it, and the types of Jews who live there. That is where Elkanah was from. There were 21 funerals in Israel on January 23rd. It was a Tuesday. Elkanah was buried on Har Herzl at 4 p.m., survived by his parents, Eliyahu and Rachel, 5 older siblings, Reuven, Shai, Shiral, Tiferet. And 1 week after he fell, January 29th, his family, flanked by loved ones, flanked by friends, they planted an olive tree. All things, a tree representing peace. They planted an olive tree outside their home in his memory. And his brother Reuben paid tribute to him on behalf of all of his siblings. And he stood there and he said, "Our little brother, our little brother, wherever you went, You left a footprint of joy, unity, modesty, simcha, achdut, tzniut. You always honored your parents. You always were caring and respectful. You are a hero of Israel. You were exempt from military service, but you still fought to enlist. You never ran away from responsibility. You always stood tall, strong, determined. I was afraid you would fall, my little brother. You were the person with the most powerful silence I ever knew. A simple person, smiling and funny. I love you forever, my little brother. Sorry, my little brother's right over there. Reuven spoke of Elkanah's powerful silence, and it should remind us of the most frightening, inspiring prayer of the high holy days we are about to read it, Unetana Tokef. And we say, B'shofar gadol yitka, v'kol dmama daka yishma. The great shofar is sounded, and a still, small, silent voice shall be heard. The shofar alarms us to awake. But it's always that kol dmama daka, that still, small, silent voice. That's what pierces the soul, and so we must ask on Rosh Hashanah, what is Elkanah's silence saying to us this morning? Of all the stories I could have shared, why this one? I have lost friends. The commander of one of the units that we donated tens of thousands of dollars of equipment to. And I sent you a picture of he and I surrounded by his soldiers, embracing on the border of Lebanon. You saw the picture. And in early November, while I was in Israel, I sent it to you, and only a few weeks later, Nir Gutman, he leapt onto a bomb to protect those very same soldiers you saw in a picture. He was ventilated, airlifted, received life-saving operations. One of the two friends with whom I traveled across Israel in a van loaded with 6 figures worth of supplies, 6 figures worth of gift cards from you. He went to visit Nir days later after he awoke from a coma, and he whispered to him, connected to tubes and everything, Nir, do you remember me? And he opened his eyes and he whispered, of course I remember you. Thank you, he said. And thank your community for me. I'm alive. But of all the stories to focus on this Rosh Hashanah, it's the one of Elkanah Yehuda Sfez. His kol dmama daka, that silent message to us that I want you to remember. And I want to wrap his story around the teachings of Rebbe Tarfon, who in the Mishnah 2,000 years ago, he instructed us all, Ayom Katsar, the day is short. Time goes by fast, my friends. Is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they? Sunrise, sunset. Sunrise, sunset. Own time, Rabbi Tarfon says, because Amlacha meruba, there is so much work to do, so much to accomplish, but po'olim atzelim, we are prone, he said. This is the direct translation. We are prone to being lazy. But I'll soften it. We're prone to being distracted, naive, maybe even unaware. Ubal habayit dochek, and the Baal Habayit, the master of the great house, not our house, the big giant, the world, the Baal Habayit is urging us, insisting, don't waste your time. Hayom Katsar, the day is short, there's much work to do, but the sun is setting, always. King Solomon warned us, Al titalel b'yom machar ki lo tedam hayeled hayom. Don't boast of the opportunity for tomorrow. You don't know what today's going to bring. Don't push off to tomorrow what you can do today. Today the sun can set, and tomorrow's opportunities will set with it. Or, and this is my favorite, don't become like Dr. Seuss. How will it get so late so soon? It's night before it's afternoon. December's here before it's June. My goodness, how the time has flown. How did it get so late so soon? Mitzvah bali yadecha tachzikba. When a mitzvah comes into our hands, we're obligated to seize it when an opportunity presents itself to engage in or defend the mission of the Jewish people. We're supposed to recognize it, act upon it with urgency, with passion. We're not supposed to let it linger. We're not let it sit unattended. But often, my friends, that task is difficult, and there may even be consequences. But on this day, we have to remind ourselves that no one has ever said that the path of the righteous, no one has ever said that the path of the Jew is easy. And in some form or another, we're all guilty of pushing off a mitzvah, an opportunity to fulfill, to defend the mission of the Jewish people. Sometimes we're distracted. Sometimes we're naive. We think that the opportunity will be there even tomorrow. Sometimes we're just unaware. It was George Orwell who said the hardest thing to see is that which is right in front of your nose. But we're all fallible. And these reasons, distraction, naivete, unawareness, these reasons are understandable. On Rosh Hashanah, we acknowledge that these reasons are forgivable. But sometimes, rather than seize the obligation to the Jewish people, we seize an exemption from it. And that's different. It can be easier, more comfortable, more convenient. Patur baba yadecha tachzikba, an exemption falls into our hands. Sometimes a Jew takes it. The day is short. There's so much to accomplish. But we sometimes find an exemption in the moment, but God is urging us. And then Rabbi Tarfon, he reminds us with his conclusion, Lo alecha melacha ligmor, lo ata ben chorin lebatel mamena. Being a Jew is hard, he says. It's not your duty to finish the work, but you're not at liberty to neglect it either. Just because we won't finish it doesn't absolve us from it. That, my friends, is the covenant. That's our contract with God. That's our contract with each other. The following is a letter from Elkanah Yehuda Svez. The heading: Appeal on the Decision of Recruitment. This is my personal appeal. This letter is a request that you consider once again your decision to grant me an exemption from Army service. He doesn't have a lawyer. There's no mitigator. There's no advocate. It's just him writing a letter. The reason I'm asking for you to withdraw my exemption and why I want to enlist in the IDF is because I believe and was always educated that every person is obligated to give back to Am Yisrael. And in the letter, his seriousness, it's embedded in his choice of language. He uses a word. The word is litrom, truma. It's from the Torah. It means contribution. When God says to Moses with regards to the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, Asher yidbeinu libo tichu et trumati, accept contributions, truma, from everyone whose heart so moves them. Accept them all. Elkanah continues. I feel that I'm even more obligated to give than most. I live in Kiryat Arba. I live in Hebron. I see every day soldiers sacrificing their good years for my and my family's safety. And furthermore, from the time I was a child, I've not stopped dreaming about when it would be my turn to volunteer, my turn to contribute, my turn to give of myself and to help Am Yisrael. Is that our dream? And I'm not speaking about enlisting into the IDF. This is not a charge to go take a plane across the country, across the world, and enlist in the IDF. I'm asking, how many of us dream from childhood? When will I be able to contribute to Am Yisrael? When will I be able to give back to the story of our people? Yom Katsar, the day is short, there's so much work to do. I know I won't finish it, but I can't abstain from it. Do we dream that way? What does Elkanah say? You've given me an out, and it's more convenient, and it's certainly easier and safer, but I don't want the exemption. Do we say this? My desire, he continues, to enlist flows from a deep and honest faith. I'll serve the best that I can in the most meaningful way that I can. You've exempted me from this mitzvah. I can seize this opportunity to opt out and say, great, I've got an excuse, easy peasy. But Elkanah insisted, I don't accept. You see, sometimes the right choice, the Jewish choice, adhering to a covenant with a people, a land, a Torah, and God is the hardest choice. What does it mean to be a responsible, accountable Jew in 5785? It means listen to the Kol Dmama Daka of Elkanah Yehuda Sfez and allow it to inspire us. And when it's offered, don't take the exemption. We got a big election coming up. Doesn't matter to me how you vote. It does, but I'm not going to talk about it. The truth is, it doesn't matter. It's not getting any easier. I asked nearly every bar mitzvah student 2 questions. You know the first one, I've spoken on it. What are the names of your 8 great-grandparents? Where do they come from? But there's a second question, a follow-up. Why do you think your great-grandparents stayed Jewish? After all, the Golden Medina, that's the ultimate exemption. Leave tradition in the shtetl. Moshe can become Mark. Mendelbaum can become Miller. And waiving his exemption papers, Mark Miller will have an all-access pass to the freedoms of America with no worry of being earmarked as the cheap, dirty Jew. If your name's Mark Miller, I'm sorry. It's just an example. They didn't take the exemption. 4 generations later, the Jew, us, we feel pretty alone. Alone in the world, alone in America, and the exemption's still available should we want it. And let me tell you something, that exemption looks appealing. And it's safer. We're a covenantal people. That covenant with God, with the ethical imperatives that differentiates us from the world, that binds us to the land of Israel, to each other. It began with a lonely man of faith. One person. Lech lecha. God called out to Abraham, go for yourself and be willing to be by yourself. To be a child of Abraham is to have the courage to be different, to challenge the idols of the age, whatever the idols, whenever the age. And when we read that initial call, go forth, be alone, we assume that God singles out Abraham for this divine mission. But no, that's not it. You need to understand this. Judaism doesn't understand it that way. It was a call to all of humanity. All of humanity. Who can understand that there's a better ethical imperative? Who can hear? Who can realize it? It was a call to the world. One individual, one, possessed the spiritual awareness and the fortitude to act upon it. Abraham bequeathed to us, his descendants, the courage to be different, the courage to be a minority. And he was the first person to be called Ivri, the first person to be called Hebrew. That's what the kings of other nations called him. Avraham ha-Ivri. That word is plucked as if from thin air when it appears in the Torah. It comes from the word ever, it means side. The kings who nicknamed Avraham, Avraham ha-Ivri, they did so because Avraham haya be'ever echad, uvechol olam haya be'ever hasheni. Abraham was on one side and the entire world was on the other. That's what it means to be a Jew. 2 roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by. That alone has made all the difference. But traveling alone can be treacherous, unpredictable. Traveling alone, it can get dark. Being alone is to be vulnerable. It's to be easily singled out and targeted by predators. So when we reach that fork in the road, that crossroads offers an exemption. Sever the covenant. Fidelity to Torah, God, the Jewish people. Become Mark Miller. Join the masses. But 3,000 years of our ancestors, they haven't done it. Why? Why are we here? Why are you here? They knew it was a trick. It's a trick. The mission of the Jewish people was made clear to us. Yeah, the world singles out the Jew, subjects the Jew to double standards and hypocrisy, and it pains our children most. We heard that yesterday. But we must remind those same kids that the first time that we as a people were actually singled out, it wasn't to be called names, it wasn't to be blamed for plagues, it wasn't to be indicted for killing somebody else's God, and it wasn't to be tattooed for death camps. That's not why we were singled out. Atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. God calls down and says, you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You will be holy, and I have set you apart from everyone else. You will be mine. You are separated out, singled out to be a kingdom of priests, not collars, not those priests. Kohens, and not just Cohens, Katzes, Khans. All of us are singled out and charged with the mission of being priests to the world. That's the covenant. That's the intention of fidelity to God, to Torah, to Israel, to each other. And you have to know what it means. You see, in ancient times, those same Kohanim, the priests of Israel, they were entrusted sacred responsibility. They oversaw the intricate inner workings of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. That became the temple in Jerusalem. Their duties, vast, complicated, but essential to the spiritual life of the Jewish people, and they're all outlined for us in the Torah. The Kohanim, the priests for Israel, were a gesher. They were a bridge between God and the Jewish people. Not a surrogate, not a substitute, a bridge. So when God singles us out and says, be an entire kingdom of priests, be a mamlechet kohanim, it's to serve as a bridge between God and the world. Do you think it's a coincidence that every innovation, 99%, the world changes for the better because of us? Sometimes for the worse, but more often for the better. A gesher between the divine aspiration of what the world can and should be and what it is. We, the Jews, are tasked with maintaining a sacred, eternal covenant in order to elevate the world, not to proselytize, not to convert the world to Judaism. That's not what we do. We are exemplars, or are supposed to be, of what is just, righteous, ethical, what is anchored in truth, not propaganda and rhetoric, and we show the world what a society like that can look like. What does the prophet Isaiah say? I, God, in my grace have summoned you. I have grasped you by the hand. I created you. I appointed you a covenantal people, an or l'goyim, a light unto the nations. Lifkoach enaim ivrot. Open the eyes deprived of light. Rescue the prisoners from confinement, from the dungeon, those who sit in darkness. That's our charge. But it's a heck of a lot easier to take the exemption. Shirk our promise to God, our loyalty to Torah, the Jewish people, our responsibility to the world. It's a lot easier to be a Mark Miller. Every Jew in every generation stands at a crossroads and faces the question: will I remain resolute in the covenant, in the mission, knowing it may be difficult, lonely, dangerous, full of sacrifice, knowing that I may not see the outcome of my efforts and commitment, but understanding that this cannot be an excuse for opting out altogether? Or will I take the exemption? Turn aside when the burden feels too heavy, too inconvenient, too precarious. That crossroads was unfamiliar to us. It wasn't unfamiliar to Jewish history, but it was to us. Not this year. We're there. We're standing there, all of us. We are at the moment of decision. This is our test. We've arrived at the same crossroads of those who exchanged the pogroms of the shtetl for the promise of prosperity at Ellis Island. We are the descendants of those who rejected the exemption then. Elkanah Yehuda Sfez stood at that crossroads. And if you think his is an extreme example, it is not. It's an extreme outcome. His crossroads was identical to ours right now, the same one that our ancestors have stood at for a millennia. He chose not the exemption, but the commitment. And history is full of extreme outcomes. It's full of extreme outcomes. What about the Inquisition? Where are my Jews from Cuba? We got any Jews from Cuba here? Sephardic Jews from Cuba. Jubins. Can I say that? Your families are not from Cuba. They're not from Cuba because their grandparents came from Turkey. Then they were not Turkish. Their grandparents stood at the crossroads in Spain during the Inquisition, and they tore up the exemption, which was then conversion, knowing it could result in the most extreme of outcomes, but they maintained the possibility for their descendants, you, all who just raised your hand, to elevate and bring light to a world that so desperately and so frequently needs it. How about congregant? I heard this story the other day. Student, University of Michigan. His teacher, a week before final exams, passed out a sign-up sheet for a pro-Hamas rally and offered extra credit to those who attended. What's that kid supposed to do? Same university. A congregant who normally walks around with an Israeli flag in her backpack just in case, finds herself in the middle of an encampment. She's got a Megan David hanging from her neck. The Israeli flag is spilling out of her backpack. What's she supposed to do? University of North Carolina. Kid standing in the middle of an anti-Semitic mob. He's also got blue and white on. He's also got a Megan David. And he's standing there as a group of tyrants tries to tear down an American flag. What's he supposed to do? That was one of our kids, by the way. You know the story. What about the congregant whose corporate office puts out mailings encouraging, with incentive, employees to stand in solidarity with Palestinians and their justified resistance? What's that guy supposed to do? What about the fact that every single synagogue in the country has bled its budget to put armed guards at its entrance? Easier to stay home, isn't it? Certainly safer. What about Elan Levy? You know that name? Elan Levy was Israel's official government spokesman. A few weeks ago, he was invited into the pit of vipers, into the pit of Hamas supporters and Jew haters to debate Mehdi Hassan, one of Britain's most prolific media personalities. What's he supposed to do? He did it. And he said on Instagram in a post to all of us, I did it because Jews must stand up to bullies, and if I chickened out of a playground fight with a bully, I'd be the excuse for every other Jew to do the same. To all of Gen Z, he said, I'm pleading with you. If Israelis are our age and they can face Hamas terrorists on the battlefield, if I can face Hamas leading propagandists on the debate stage, you can face Hamas fanboys on campus, in the workplace, in Times Square, the Mall of Washington, D.C., Los Olas Boulevard. No one's coming to save us, he said. It's on us. Everywhere I go around the world, I meet Jewish students, I meet Jewish people, and I tell them, this is not the time to keep your head down. Don't exempt yourself from the Jewish story. You've got a voice, use it, or things are only going to get worse. Jews, he said, stand up. We stand up for ourselves, for each other, even when they call us names, even when they push us around, even when they try to drag our name through the mud, even when their supporters come after us on social media and they call us Nazi, disgusting, evil, a fascist, a weasel, a liar, a gaslighting fraud. Nothing, he says, nothing an anti-Semite can say I care about anymore. Nothing. We Jews have to shock the world, especially when it's hard. Because Jews speak up. Jews stand up. Jews fight back. Jews choose to answer back. Jews have each other's backs. Now go and show them what you're made of, he finished. Now Elkanah's silence, that still small voice, it calls out to each of us today, and it asks, what path will I choose? Will we seize the opportunity to contribute to the future of the Jewish people, to continue the legacy handed down from Abraham, who stood alone in his faith, his mission, his courage? Will we, like every generation before us, like Elkanah, forego the easier road and embrace the call to serve, to give of ourselves, to stand in unity with the Jewish people, even when it requires sacrifice? Or will we take the exemption as we enter this new year, 5785? Let us resolve to listen to that voice, called Mamadaka, the quiet call to responsibility and accountability. Let us not take the exemptions that life so often offers. Let us choose the harder path, the path of mitzvot, of contribution, of fidelity to God, toward the land of Israel, to each other, and in doing so, and this is the only way, we take on the mission of Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of priests, a light to the nations, and may, my friends, that collective strength of those actions bring peace, justice, truth, and holiness to the world. Amen.